It's very important, and it's a great honor to be hosting this exhibition and reception here in the Strasbourg European Parliament. I'm a very strong friend of Ukraine, and indeed I was one of the first people to say back in 2002 that Ukraine should have a European future. And in many ways I regret at the time no other member state capital was prepared to support that idea. I wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal and a letter to the Financial Times, but I was ahead of my time. But I sometimes wonder if Ukraine had been given a more generous, welcoming approach by the European Union, whether all this tragedy we see around us in this exhibition tonight may not have happened. But that said, I think it's also true that people are slightly now parking the issue to do with the Donbassa, the annexation of Crimea, but also the non-implementation of the Minsk agreements and the fact that people are still suffering. It's being parked into the kind of frozen conflict part of international relations, you know, a bit like Transnistria or Ossetia, Abkhazia, and people are forgetting that there are still many, many people who are suffering in the eastern occupied parts of Donbass. I was particularly pleased to hear of the very great work done by the Rinata Ahmetova Humanitarian Foundation, which has helped more than 1 million people through its food parcels, which it's been doing for almost 5 years. When you have a situation where more than 2 million people have been displaced from their homes, where there have been something like 11,000 people who have died and casualties, this means huge trauma to families. It means children who have suffered, they've lost a father, they may have lost a mother in a bombing attack. They've been traumatized by seeing the war around them. So a whole generation of children are growing up, of course, traumatized by this very, very brutal war. And it's true that, you know, things are much better than they were at the peak. But nevertheless, I think that it's important that it remains uppermost in the minds of the leaders, political leaders in European capitals, in members of the European Parliament, that they are aware that this is not a resolved issue, that people are still dying, people are still suffering. So I think this is a very timely exhibition. My heart goes out looking around the photographs, seeing young children who've been traumatized by the war, seeing a child who has lost a leg, whose mother was killed as a result of an explosion. I'm a medical doctor in my previous professional life. I understand as a psychiatrist what this can do to a child to be traumatized by war, post-traumatic stress disorder, we call it in medicine. This will be a big issue that needs resolution and requires an awful lot of professional and financial resources. So clearly the Ahmetova Foundation has done a lot of work. More than 1 million people have been helped. I think that's remarkable. I think we need to recognize that by this exhibition today. 1 million people have been directly helped with emergency food supplies. You would have thought that Ukraine, being a European country, a member of the Council of Europe, United Nations, that there would have been a huge mobilization of help from across the world. There was some of that, but clearly not enough. Ahmetova, through his foundation, has no doubt done a fantastic job to marry the public and the private and the charitable together to help innocent people who have suffered in a war in which they played no part. They weren't to blame for the war. The war was as a result of huge external forces, but ordinary people who were going about their daily lives suddenly found that, you know, a bomb would land on their apartment block, or their son was forced to fight in a war in which they really wanted not to be part of at all. And so I welcome the work done by the Foundation, and I hope that people who see this today, the politicians, my colleagues, the opinion formers, won't forget about Ukraine and the needs for Ukraine to be helped in future.